came down on Sunday mornings, worshiped as a family. And so they continued to invest in their churches. And so the churches really were kind of the stalwart that made it through the tough times in Savannah as those family places of family faith. So the residential didn't fare quite as well. Well, of course, a lot of folks moved out to the suburbs, out into different surrounding counties. And so the downtown area really fell into disrepair. But the churches, again, were the lifeblood that kept things going. So let's look at a little bit of the adapt and reuse. And I'm going to go back to the Clarence Thomas example. This is the Franciscan convent that we converted to classrooms. And it's now SCAD's Historic Preservation Center. And the school that Clarence Thomas went to was just to the right-hand side of the slide. So it's a very humble building, built in the 1870s, I believe. It has this beautiful side porch where the sisters would come out if they were sick, and they would sit in the sun. And I guess they called it the tuberculosis porch on the old plans. So I guess they would go out and get some fresh air and sun and sit on the porch. And it was elevated, so there wasn't any kind of interaction with the street, people walking by. But it makes a great place for students to hang out. The main hallway, as you can see here, are quite wide. So when the sisters had their processional in the mornings, they would come from the cells and walk 2 by 2 over to the chapel. And so the hallways are quite wide, and we retained all the historic look of those hallways. What we converted to classrooms in this picture were their old cells. And so we left the ghosting on the floor. So if you go in a classroom, it might be 4 or 5 cells. And so the students that go to class there, they can see these they're probably about 6 or 8 feet wide, the cells that the nuns used to live in. So we're still able to preserve and tell that story, even as it's used as classrooms now. And this is the chapel that we really wanted to preserve the character and quality of it. Beautiful, nice lighting. It's quite small, but it's still used for lectures. We kind of hit a screen back up here that can drop down. So it's a great educational space. We retained the tin ceilings in there and just left them in kind of a natural state that they were in when we found them. We kind of wanted to not butter up history, but kind of let them be what they were. This is another interesting story. It was actually a synagogue that was then made into an Episcopal church and then made into a student center for SCAD. That's quite a transition. Probably not normal for most student centers to be an old synagogue. But you can see on the top, the steeples are the Star of David up here. It looks like they both are. I can't tell in that picture. But a beautiful building. This is on Montgomery Street. And you can see in the detailing, even the Star of David here at the column capitals. It's a unique worship space in that it was really symmetrical, square, almost cubic, really. And the men would worship on the ground level, and the women were in seats on the second and third. I guess even the kids were on the top level. But on these intermediate levels, they had very steep steps, like steps that were as tall as this table that the women would climb up so they could see what was going on below. And as part of our preservation interpretation of that, we retained a few sections of those seats so that the students can get a sense of what the history was here. It's been converted now to the student center, so it may be sacrilegious, but on the lower level they've got skee ball and pool tables. But then the main level is used primarily for lectures and events. And the second floor, we have these little student study areas and gaming areas where you can sit and play PlayStation in the synagogue, I guess. But the idea of keeping it in use and repurposing the building certainly is better than losing the building of this importance. And you might wonder about the colors. It actually has LED lighting that changes, so it cycles from this green to purple to pink. So it's if you stay there for about 2 hours, it'll drive you nuts. But it's interesting for a few minutes. I did want to talk about this is not a church, obviously. This is a railroad building that our firm was involved with, and it got a 2014 AI National Design Award. So I think you only get like maybe one of those in the lifetime. kind of brag about him a little bit. We work with Christian Sotil, who's another local architect and former student of mine at SCAD. So truly the student had become the master. So we were the architects that sort of made everything work. He was the architect that had the great ideas. So, but I still take credit for all of that. But this was an old railroad and part of the Central Georgia network. And you can see here, this is really kind of the Central Georgia district that all fed back out to these rail spurs going out of town. And part of that complex was the roundhouse, which you can see here for the train maintenance. This is the engine house here. Those are still in existence. In fact, most of the railroad complex, this whole section, still exists today, and you can tour it. It's really pretty fascinating. All of these buildings in this area have been demolished, and that is now it's a battle site from the Revolutionary War. So that's been restored. I think its history takes precedence over the railroads, probably. And then you see these warehouses, these long skinny buildings, and that's our visitor center. These two are no longer there. And then this is SCAD's architecture building, and then this is our SCAD museum. And so the way this worked, obviously with the trains coming in and out, ours was called the up freight warehouse, and the other was called the down freight warehouse. And so depending on which way, if it was coming in or going out, you know which warehouse to go to. And they were at street level on one side, as you see here on the right. And then on the left, the tracks were at lower level. And so they would push freight in and warehouse it, sort it, and then push it out to the trains, or pull it in, depending on how they were going. But you can see here in the 60s, it had really reached a pretty poor state and was in bad condition, already sections of it falling down. And so I'll never forget, I got a phone call while I was in the Florida Keys, you know, trying to enjoy myself on my 1 week off, that the building had collapsed. And that's not the kind of call you want to get as an architect. But we knew there were sections of it that were in pretty bad shape, and we'd already fenced it off, so fortunately nobody was hurt. But fairly large sections of it fell in. So we fenced it off and we stabilized them. Here you can see on the right the stabilization, and you try to make it as nice as you can, but it is what it is. But there on the left, you can see this is the museum as it is now. So we really had this really long brick shell that was kind of a ruin. And our approach for the design was to try to slip the new museum in, and where we could, we would contrast it. So if the existing building was brick here in the ruined part, then we would contrast it with precast concrete. If the brick was heavy and sits on the ground, then we would make the precast light and float over the ground. You know, if there was a lot of articulation with brick texture, then we would do it with minimal texture on the concrete. And so the whole program was to kind of contrast the design of the existing ruin with the new museum infill. In fact, let me go back one here. This slide is on the railroad side where the tracks would have been, so we kind of brought that level up and did an open courtyard the width of a train track and roughly the height. So when you walk through that space, you really get a sense of how the trains would have interacted with this space. In areas where we had ruin, you can see here where a wall had fallen down. We retained those and just made them part of the architecture. So you can see here, that's part of the pedestrian experience now, is that you see that ruin. And again, even in the texture of the ground, we contrasted this brick with the concrete. And again, the precast with the brick. And then inside, we retained as much of the brick as we could, but still created new, clean museum spaces. So this is the courtyard on the train side. And this is the architecture building here and the museum here. And it creates a really nice courtyard for students. This is another building we did for SCAD that's actually the rail office, that's actually the head office of the museum, the railroad warehouse. And so the business was transacted on Broad Street, and all the freight was done back behind on Turner Street. Just a beautiful, ornate building. We restored You see lots of the plaster work here, and transitioned it to an interactive classroom. They do a lot of things where they'll get corporate partners and they'll come in and collaborate with SCAD students to come up with some new and innovative ideas. This is another building downtown that we did with SCAD that was an old men's club called the Harmony Club. And as the men's club closed at like the 1920s or so, it was made into offices and really kind of fell into disrepair. And then SCAD acquired it and transitioned it to what is now fashion merchandising. So if you go to study how to merchandise fashion, this is the building you would be in. So we tried to liven it up a little bit with some different kind of lighting and architecture, tried to maintain the historic integrity on the exterior. But in the interior, like this area where we had some damaged brick, we just went ahead and opened it up so that the students can interact and see what's going on. And that's, I think, one of the key things about the SCAD program is that they try to create that studio environment that we as architects are familiar with, but in every discipline. So like if you're in fashion merchandising, you can see what someone else is doing, you can see other classes, this is actually a little display, kind of like a window display at Macy's in New York or something, where students do window dressing as part of their curriculum. And so people get to see what other people are thinking and doing as part of the educational process. This is a warehouse that we converted into one of their cafes. And again, one of the overriding factors that we try to maintain is the integrity of the space. So this warehouse, when we dropped in this seating area, these booths, it has a lower ceiling height so that it still reads clear that it's a warehouse. But we made it interesting, so we've got this little piece that kind of floats inside the building that creates a dining space for them. This is one we just finished, and it was it's an interesting story. It was a Jewish woman visited Savannah, and I believe it was the 1830s or 40s, and when she got off the boat, they were helping her off the boat, the river boat, and the pilot was a handsome man that she later fell in love with and married, Captain Abrams. And so this is the Abrams home for women. When he passed away and left her some money, she started a home for women, because in that day, which I guess was really not too far back, but you think about it, a lot of the charity and charitable organizations, even the Catholic charities, those have now been supplanted by government programs. But this was a home for women that were in distress of some kind, divorced or destitute or widowed. And so it filled an important need in Savannah. And over the years had fallen into disrepair. And that's kind of a familiar story with SCAD. I think, if I can digress a minute, the way they acquired a lot of these properties, the SCAD owns 70 properties in Savannah, downtown. And most of them are fairly monumental buildings that once they got kind of run down, no longer marketable, the economy was bad, people were looking for a way to get out of them so that they didn't have to pay taxes or maintain them. And so they would donate it to SCAD as a nonprofit. And so SCAD, as they started to grow, would gradually take these donations and then renovate them and convert them to classroom space. So it really was a great thing for the city, because I think a lot of these buildings probably would have been torn down and lost had it not been for that opportunity. So the Abrams Home for Women is now the Center for International Studies. And so we tried to articulate the design with things that, you know, the clocks, the world map. We have a room where they can watch soccer from whatever country they're from. We have a little Skype room where they can talk to people in different countries. But it's a place where you can even see the globes on the back wall there. That's kind of kitschy, but you know, whatever. But the idea was that we create a place for international students to get together and hang out and learn English as a second language. So it's been a very successful building. You can see the courtyard. We've got just a really good, active student space. The Board of Education in Savannah, like probably many in your hometowns, in the 70s and 80s, the old historic inner city schools just really didn't fit the function of a new school program. You know, it's got to be a sprawling one-story building with parking and a green field. And so we have a lot of those now. And it left these beautiful inner city schools to decay. So SCAD was instrumental in buying up a lot of these from the Board of Education and making them into classroom buildings. So this is Eckford Hall on Henry Street. I think it's one of the, finest buildings in Savannah. Just beautiful terracotta work. And when we renovated this one, all of the hallways had been enclosed with fireproofing, so all the stairs were enclosed in fire-rated corridors, as you might expect. The exterior had fire escapes almost from every room, because the way this is organized, obviously it's one big central hallway with classrooms flanking it, so there are two means of egress, but they're totally open to all the classrooms. So it's quite a dilemma in terms of how you meet the fire codes. Georgia has a pretty unique law on the books. It's the Georgia Existing Buildings Act. And it's not a building code, but it's actually in our state code, our state law, that allows for historic buildings that don't meet code in certain areas to be allowed to be, I'll say horse trade, but you can do other life safety measures that overcome deficiencies in the building's life safety. So for example, if you had an open stairway, if it wasn't required to be sprinkled, but you voluntarily sprinkled the building, then they would allow those to remain. You know, if you had let's say a travel distance to an exit that was too long, well, if you added a fire alarm system, or if you added a sprinkler system, or areas of refuge, or instead of 1 hour, if you bumped everything to 2 hours, it would allow non-conforming life safety issues to remain. And so it's kind of a way that we've been able to work with the local code officials to make sure that the buildings are safe, but restore them to their original beauty instead of having, you know, everything locked down in 2-hour rated shafts. So that's, I'll show you another one. We did this similar. This is the Barnard Street School that again was just a beautiful inner city school in kind of a Spanish style. That were restored. We added an elevator to it. And this building contains what's called their textiles program. And so what we try to do when we renovate the buildings is create that sense of belonging. So you see the portico when you enter the building has cotton fibers that are exposed behind these kind of light walls. And so it kind of gives you a different world feel when you enter the building, but you get a sense that, oh, this is a textiles building. And so the students here weave their own fabrics. They design different kinds of fabrics and prints. They make dyes. You know, everybody thinks art schools don't get technical, but most of the buildings have fume hoods and you know, very sophisticated printers. They have a 3D weaving machine that they can design some kind of pattern and it'll weave the texture to it. So it's pretty high tech. But again, you can see in this upper corner how we opened the hallways back up with the stairs. We actually did a deluge curtain. We added this draft stop piece here at the top of the stair with the idea that there will be some smoke capture, but then there are deluge sheds up above this that create a water curtain at the stair. So again, that Georgia Existing Building Code allowed us to make some concessions where we were deficient in life safety to overcome those. Just another example, one of many. Like I said, they have 70 buildings, so I'm not going to go through all 70, but the Anderson Street School, which has been beautifully restored and now houses foundation studies, painting, and drawing. And I wanted to close with St. Mary's, which Paul Knopf, who's in our audience, will start client on this here in Savannah. I can proudly say one of the best projects I've been involved with. And that's not because you're sitting here, Paul. It really was good. It's kind of a sad story, I think, of the demise of charity in America, where the Catholic diocese had a home for orphan girls. That's how it started in 1935. And you can see here this great picture in the dining hall with all the girls sitting ready for dinner. And later they admitted boys. And unfortunately, the changes in foster care led to the building's closing in, I think, the late 90s, early 2000s. And so it set really in stake. It wasn't decayed or anything. When we first walked through the building, the beds were all made and there were stuffed animals just like the kids had left yesterday.